Hello, and welcome to the Heathen's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Siri Vincent Plough, and I'm so glad you're here. This is the show where I explore heathenry through a queer lens. We will be talking about traditional witchcraft, runes, folklore, and so much more. Join us, won't you, as we journey to the ends of the 9 realms and back. Hello, it's been forever. I know that if you're just discovering the podcast now, it will play smoothly from one episode to the next, and I'm very glad for that. However, for long-term listeners, I apologize for the 9-month gap in episodes without warning. I went on a business hiatus for mental health purposes at the end of 2022, and with that came a pause on the podcast. And I've been working on something absolutely huge in the meantime, which has meant very little energy left over for podcasting. You might be asking, Siri, if you started season 2 last year and then took a 9-month-long break in the middle of it, can you really say that this episode is a part of season 2? To which I respond, absolutely, because I will continue to follow our themes of the underworld for this season throughout this interview and the next several episodes that will round out the season. I don't know how regularly I'll be able to get these out in real time. The absolutely huge other project is 100% my priority right now, but I had a reason for publishing this episode today. I wanted to come back today specifically because it is pub day for my guest, Ryan Smith. This is actually the second interview with Ryan that I recorded for this episode. The first one was recorded before I read his newest book, and as I was reading it to blurb it, I realized there was so much lost opportunity there that I absolutely had to bring him back for another interview episode if he was willing. Ryan is very gracious and agreed to do a second interview. Author of The Way of Fire and Ice, the living tradition of Norse paganism, the upcoming Spinning Wyrd, exploring the Nordic Mysteries, and editor of On Black Wings, Ryan Smith has been a practicing pagan since his teens with over a decade of experience in inclusive and anti-racist heathen spirituality. He has been published at Hugin's Heathen Hof, Patheos Pagans, Truth Out, and as part of the Bringing Race to the Table and No Pasaran anti-fascist dispatches from a World in Crisis anthologies. Presented talks and rituals and Pantheacon, The Gathering Paths, Hexenfest, and Many Gods West, and is currently creating a heathen podcast, The Wayward Wanderer. His new book, Spinning Wyrd, is absolutely delicious. Expanding on the progressive ideas and practices in The Way of Fire and Ice, this Next Step book teaches you how to tap into the forces of the Nordic cosmos. The greatest of these forces is Wyrd, the symphony of life co-created by all beings, from the humblest plants to the mightiest gods. I've included a link to my bookshop.org affiliate shop where you can purchase the book, or you can find it wherever books are sold, as it is out today, August 1st, 2023. And now, on to the interview. Hello, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining me today again. For the listeners out there, we had recorded an interview, and then I got a chance to read Ryan's forthcoming book, Spinning Wyrd, which is incredible. And I was like, there are so many things that I wish I had asked them instead. So we're here again. We're here having another conversation. Ryan, who are you? What is your work in the world? All of that good stuff.
Well, I'm the author of The Way of Fire and Ice, and I'm currently also teaching and writing within the Fire and Ice practice. And if you're interested in finding out more, on blackwings.com is a great place to go. But anyway, skipping past the shameless plug. So, what I've been doing within that is we've been building something of a shared spiritual community and helping to develop a better understanding of inclusive practice and just sort of what this more sort of a like new and different kind of heathen practice looks like. And, wrestling with those bigger questions of what is it to be a heathen or a pagan in the world that we're living in right now, and what can we do to help each other. I also have a podcast, The Wayward Wanderer, which you can find pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts.
Yeah, I think that listeners of this podcast will really enjoy your podcast because you go into a lot of political theory and mixing that with theology around heathenry. And you just go really deep on these topics, which I super appreciate.
Well, I don't think that you can separate these like social and political questions from spirituality. That's never been true of any spiritual or religious movement in history ever. The ones that say the loudest that they're not being political are usually just either implicitly supporting the power systems that already exist or are very assiduously as like averting their gaze from things that their own theology and spirituality says they should be doing something about. I mean, and yeah, I think that I appreciate where the impulse comes from, but I think that we have to get into that messy reality as much as like when we're building our spirituality in these times.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, to kick off the interview, I just wanted to ask you, um, how would you characterize Spinning Wyrd? How do you talk about it? What is the book's elevator pitch, as you will, or summary, so that people can kind of be grounded in like what this work is that we're going to be diving into?
So, Spinning Wyrd gets into what you could call the cosmology of heathen spirituality, which is talking about the way reality works. Basically, what are the underlying assumptions and patterns and concepts around things like life and death, change, agency, like all those big questions about how everything works. Like this is the book that gets into the rules that even the gods have to follow. Not because they're, mandate from on high, but because this is just the way that reality within like a heathen context generally works. And, and I think that instead of, like say doing a God's book or something, which will definitely happen at some point, I think it's more important to get to this first because these are things that influence everything. Wyrd touches all the powers from the greatest of the gods to the smallest living things. And part of Wyrd is all things live, grow, change, and die.
I think I found it to be a particularly refreshing book because um, a lot of people are really quick to jump into these are the gods or these are the stories of the gods or instructionals on like heathen bloat practice, for example, or how do you form a kindred, and all of these things are like really important areas of discussion. But I am personally a firm believer in the idea that heathenry is a way of life and is best defined by whoever is practicing it, like what that looks like. So the way that my heathenry plays out personally is a little bit different than, people might expect if they were to read a book and see like, oh, these bloats happen at this specific time and like all of this. But that's just not what speaks to my personal life. And I think that's totally okay. Like the how of it is important, but I think the why of it is more important. And that's actually why I called this podcast the Heathen's Journey podcast, because, I'm trying to figure out the how. I'm certainly not an expert and sharing the process of learning via a podcast as I go. Um, and it's the why of it that I think is a constant source of intrigue and interest. Like, why move from standard witchcraft or even like atheist witchcraft into heathenry, which was very much my journey. And it is these whys. It is these big, like, how do we approach the cosmology of the world? How do we conceive of right, wrong, ethics, justice, all of these things?
Absolutely. Like, and for me, I feel like the biggest thing for me in my practice is sort of feeling what sort of almost feeling like where things are within Wyrd, of where is everything, and just sort of the big, like, aggregate, continuously evolving cause and effect that is like the heathen concept of fate. And even, getting away from that word, because it's just got so much baggage attached to it, of like people hear fate and they think, well, this is a thing that has to happen. Like they think something that's like inherited from like a very Christian interpretation of how pre-Christians understood cause and effect, that doesn't really quite measure up with it. And that's something that I also like wanted to get into a lot more with this book, was that these are things that are like these whys, that there is like a logic to it and there's a consistency to it. And I'll be the first to say that a lot of the whys that are in here are, I'm filling in the gaps, and these are like leaps of logic and inference. And part of that's because we don't have really good why sources that are left over from the pre-Christian Nordic peoples. Like the only like primary source that we have that's written and produced by someone probably from that culture is the Poetic Edda. So, we don't have things like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, or the Book of Going Forth by Day, for like Egyptian practice, or like the reams of material that still survive of classical Greek philosophy and theology. So, I'll be the first to say this is making leaps and is jumping outward from what we know and what does exist. So, but it's still something that I think is, if we're going to grow and develop as a spirituality, we have to do that. Like we have to answer these whys. Like it can't just be, well, it's this particular set of gods and this particular set of rituals, because that by itself for some folks is not enough. And I think that really when you look at other kind of spiritual practice, it isn't just that. Like there's always more to it.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that everything that you said is very important. And I think also that is sometimes part of what draws people to pagan practice, is that they can explore the why for themselves. Like, around a framework of culture, around like a cultural framework, which I think is really important. So as a big part of this book, the book is not necessarily about death and dying and the underworld and all of that, but death and change and transformation and the different realms of the Nordic pagan worldview are really central themes. So, of course, death and the underworld has to come up, right? So let's talk about the idea of an underworld from a heathen perspective. Because this entire season has been talking about underworlds, has been talking about death, has been talking about some of these dark concepts, as a means of furthering spiritual growth, right? And I just want to kind of pick your brain about what does that look like from a specifically heathen perspective?
I think the biggest thing about death from a heathen perspective is it is just another part of existence. It's another way of being. And those who are dead have shifted to a different way of being and existing, as opposed to those who are living. And even like we even have, like, for example, the story of Balder, where the god Balder dies from the mistletoe arrow thrown by his brother Hod, and goes to Helheim, which is the same place that all those who die of a straw death, and which is basically like a death of old age or illness, go. So like even gods go to Helheim potentially if they should happen to perish in that fashion. And generally, gods die, worlds die, all things eventually come to an end, but that also gives space for new things to emerge from the ashes of what came before. So it is a very death is just a part of how everything works. It's a part of life, and it's a part of what keeps all of existence sort of spinning on its axis. It's not this sort of like necessarily like a final, this is it, beginning, middle, end, that's all she wrote, or anything like that. It's part of a bigger cyclical process. That's always sort of like things are ending and their endings bring their different renewal. And particularly when we're talking like heathen death and like the heathen underworld, it's a place where that, and like, I think that kind of reinforces that if it doesn't have the sense of your death is decided, like what happens to you after you die is decided as sort of a judgment based on how you lived, but rather is a consequence of the way that you die. So it isn't exactly it isn't a sense of judgment, because there are certainly some underworlds that have an element of judgment to them, with like heaven and hell being the most obvious examples. But we also see stuff in like, say, the Egyptian weighing of hearts, or like, say, in Hellenic materials around Hades and Tartarus and the Elysian Fields. There's absolutely other forms of death. And this is something that doesn't have necessarily a particular moral weight attached to where you end up, with like one very noteworthy exception to that. But that's something that I think is important to understand, is that because how you end, where you spend your time after we pass on from this world, is a reflection of the way you leave it. It's not a reflection of whether or not you obeyed certain particular rules or standards or something. It's more things like, for example, those who die of a drowning death go to Aegir and Ran, who are the Jotnar that rule over the ocean depths. Most people go to Helheim because, most people are going to die of old age or injury or illness or what have you. That was true then. That's true now. That's always been true throughout history. So that's like where most people end up. There's some implications that maybe people who are particularly favored by specific gods might end up with those gods. Although, what happens around Ragnarok with all that is its own open question that's sort of unanswered there. But there isn't anything that necessarily says you were good, so therefore you get a reward. You were bad, you get a punishment. It's more like, even like, say, Valhalla, which I think is less of a warrior's paradise and more, being trapped in a life of violence, but perpetuated. I personally think the whole like tendency by like Victorian and medieval writers to like put Valhalla in a heaven place was their way of rationalizing the Vikings running amok all over Europe of, well, clearly they had some kind of fanatical desire to die gloriously in battle that's totally nothing like earning the martyr's crown and sitting at the right hand of Jesus because you died in the name of Christianity, to explain why they were so effective, and not really mundane things like they were all sailors, so therefore they knew how to actually work with discipline and as a team.
Right. Yeah. I really like how you put that, because it just sounds, honestly, like going to Valhalla is not where I want to end up. Like, that sounds horrible. Like, you relive a really traumatic event every single day, and then you feast, and then you're healed, and it all starts over again. Like, that's not exactly what I want.
Yeah.
For an afterlife.
Actual combat veterans I've talked to, like, don't call that paradise.
No.
It's like, I think one of them said something like, that sounds like PTSD forever.
Exactly. Exactly. You just relive your most traumatic, like the most traumatic aspect of your life over and over forever.
But it's kind of more, it's not necessarily, you lived a violent life, so you're punished to have a violent afterlife. It's more a consequence of this is how you lived, so therefore this is what's going to be happening to you in the hereafter. And really the only one that could be seen as a judgment is the whole thing of oath breakers and murderers and kinslayers being devoured by Needhogg, or like the exact verse in the Voluspa is something like they will like be in the icy waters of Vergelmir and hunted by the great dragon. And even that one is like there isn't a figure who's like thou shalt go to Needhogg or something like that. It's just these people did these things, so that's where they end up. And that could even, I mean, one speculation I have that's in the book is maybe it's not so much that it's judgment as it is the rest of the dead just won't have them and there's nowhere else for them to go.
That is really interesting. Yeah, I think one thing that I really like to pull out of that is the inclusion of oath breakers with the murderers and the kinslayers. Yes, I want to pull at this thread of oath breakers being included in murderers and kinslayers because I think, one, it speaks to a very strong moral and ethical inclusion and imperative within heathenry to take your word very seriously and to take the truth very seriously and telling the truth very seriously. And I also think that that is one thing that might seem strange to a more modern person. And by that, I mean a more contemporary person, right? Oath breakers, I mean, I think we also need to talk a little bit about what exactly is an oath here. Because, there's like a sense of promise to it. It's not just like any time you lie, you will get put in with the oath breakers. But I think that there is, again, an emphasis on truth that is important. I would say even Loki, who is the lie smith of the gods, like one of the things that we learn from Loki is the truth that can come out of lies, and they are a very important, almost like, what is the word for it? Oh my God, parable. There we go. Loki is a very important parable in heathenry, I think. But yeah, so let's like talk about oath breaking. Like, how is oath breaking included in here? What exactly is an oath? What does that mean for us as practicing heathens today?
I think a good way to think of an oath, to like take it into, break things down and then bring it into a modern context, is when we look at the societies that heathens draw our original inspiration from, they were mostly what you would call oral cultures, which means that knowledge and information was something that was transmitted orally. Usually it was sort of kept communally. And we know this is like a feature of different oral cultures and traditions around the world. Such as like the Indigenous Australian practice of where when a story is being told, it's not just, the storyteller sitting there reciting stuff. It's that you've got everyone from grandparents to grandchildren interjecting and being like, well, wait a minute, hold on. It's not quite like that. That's not how you told it last time, kind of like, going on a Marvel forum and putting forward whatever your latest theories are about the Hulk would be, or debating Star Wars on Facebook, not much different really when you think about it. But so the thing that's important within this kind of culture, because things like law and civil procedures and stuff were something that was based on collective memory and witnessing of people's statements and affirmations, an oath was sort of the equivalent to a binding contract, that it wasn't just I am swearing to do this thing in the sense of like, New Year's resolutions or something like that. But it would be more specifically, I am swearing myself in service to you in exchange for these different like forms of material support that you're going to provide me, or I'm committing myself to this expedition to bring it to the end in exchange for you're going to do this thing for me, or I'm becoming part of a community, so therefore I swear to uphold this community's laws and values and traditions and stuff, things that are very like what we would call today a legally binding contract. So, in a lot of ways, someone who was an oath breaker is what we, in a modern sense, would call like a purveyor of fraud, like sort of like a fraudster or a con artist, really, of that. It's somebody who gives like false affirmations and offers false contracts and gives word to things that's not going to actually be held true on. And, none of these things are in any way relevant to any number of public officials that come to mind, or business officials or owners of Twitter. But
right.
That's I think what it is that is going on. If it's not just I made a promise and didn't follow through with it, it's that an oath is in heathen practice then to then put that back together. If it's not just I am giving a New Year's resolution or something, it is I am declaring that I will be doing this thing, whatever that thing is, and I am asking the people who are present to bear witness to me declaring that and to hold me to that if I should falter in it, or, call me out if I should fail. And also a thing that, at least that I think is appropriate to do in oath making, is to also in advance say, and if I should fail, here is what I would offer as recompense for failing to do so. So that, you sort of keep things whole, because, sometimes things happen, life happens, circumstances prove to be more than you can handle. We know from things like, the whole concept of Ragnarok that, doing your best and falling short isn't bad. Like, there's nothing wrong with losing as long as you tried your best. And similarly, like, I think there's nothing necessarily wrong if, like, say, because circumstances don't allow you to live up to an oath, that you didn't keep it, so long as you then offer some other kind of recompense or you do something else to repair for what happened. Like, true oath breaking is more like, yeah, I didn't do it, and you can deal with it. Too bad, so sad.
Right. Yeah. Or entering into an oath, I would imagine under like false pretexts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So thinking of people going into a business ownership together, and one of them has the idea of like embezzling or skimming some off the top themselves, even which is, like explicitly prohibited in the oath of and trust of going into business together. One thing that I think of with oath breaking is something like divorce, where you have stated an oath, even in our contemporary culture, stating an oath in front of many people is very common practice for getting married. Vows, even in just like weddings by the state, like the vows are a part of that ceremony as well. And but I think that the heathen idea of oath breaking, in the divorce settlement or in the parting of ways of the couple, there are ways of offering recompense, and there are ways of figuring out how to part amicably, figuring out how to provide, resources for the other person. And I think in that case, it is better to dissolve the oath than to continue to stay in a marriage, even though, like it's not working for you anymore. And I think that some perhaps more conservative heathens might see something like divorce as oath breaking, because you made an oath till death do us part or whatever. But I personally don't see it that way.
Well, we have like mythic precedent too. Njord and Skadi get married and then they divorce.
Yes, that's very true.
That's right in there. It was also accepted that there were, I mean, there's all kinds of examples from like the history of like, Viking age Scandinavia of where different Nordic societies would be like, yeah, we swore you'd be the king, but you're really screwing up. And therefore, we feel totally justified to throw you in a bog and pick someone else. So, I mean, there is like such a thing as saying this oath is null and void because the other party is no longer holding to it. So why should we? I mean, that's something I think is a totally valid interpretation. And it's like, that's really where it is that the fault lies, is it's not so much you made an affirmation and didn't uphold to it as it is you swore you would be following through on these particular obligations. You're not upholding them. You have been asked to be held to account to fix it, and you refuse to do so. And it's also sort of part of that more broadly, law as they conceived of it, and this is something that I think heathens really need to think on a lot more, was a thing of the community. It wasn't the way that it like in the United States, for example, and I'm sure there's going to be American listeners who will be nodding along to parts of this. There is like all law descends from the Constitution, and the Constitution has all this like mythology around it about the founding fathers as the most brilliant men of their generation who were uniquely endowed to bring this, brilliant document that's basically treated like it's scripture. I'm sure there's a lot of folks, if you were ever in the US, this might sound vaguely familiar. That gives this sense of like law coming down from on high. And generally, you could say that the way it works in modern society is law is a product of government, and it is produced by the government and enforced upon the people who are under the power of that government. Whereas with the different like Nordic groups that exist in Scandinavia, they made law by these mass assemblies that were called the tings, or like say the Icelandic Althing, and everybody in the assembly was expected to do their part to enforce the law. And the law was binding on everyone within the assembly all the same. Now, in practice, it didn't always work that way because, human history, people do messy, screwed up things. Power gets abused, things like that happen. But, generally that sort of was what the pattern was. Of law was inseparable from the people who were bound by it and upheld it, which is a different thing from what we have now, of where we constantly get examples of who the law binds and who the law protects, and how often those are not the same thing in modern society. Whereas, at least in theory, and this is the whole world that oaths in the heathen sense exist in, law is a thing that's made by the community and kept by the community. So when someone's breaking an oath, they're doing injury to the people around them.
Yeah.
Like not in an abstract way, but in a very real way. That it's not like abstractly you did injury to the state or something like that. It's you broke this oath. That means there are people in your immediate community who have been harmed in some way by your failure to not do a thing, whatever that is.
Yeah. And I think too, like, we're really circling back to that idea that you shared of the oath breakers being included with the murderers and kinslayers, because the rest of the normal people in Helheim didn't want to deal with them anymore. Like, you were an oath breaker in life. Why would we assume that you would have a good relationship with us after death? Because, there are like Helheim is the most populated of the underworlds. So there's a lot of opportunity there, I guess, for oath breakers to wreak havoc.
Oh yeah. And I mean, it does need to be said, the people that are winding up with Nidhogg, these are crimes that in their context would have been considered the worst of the worst. Like, this isn't, you didn't say the Jesus thing, so you're punished, or you're gay, or whatever the particular Christian, or like you're trans, or whatever it is that the particular church of the month is that's down the street from you, causing trouble, may be. It's very specifically not things you believed or like specific rules you may or may not have followed. It's actions you did that were considered the bottom of the barrel.
Yep.
Like, you did these things, there is no going back from that. You did these awful things, kind of thing.
Right.
Like, and I think there are some more modern groups and folks who would fit the bill there.
Yeah, I can see that. Yes.
Like, I could see a case for crimes against humanity counting.
Yes. Well, I mean, that would be like,
all three.
yeah,
I
really,
think.
frankly. Yeah. I was just trying to think of like a contemporary political example from the US, but most contemporary political examples, I think, cover all three in some way. So kind of getting back into these underworlds, these underrealms, there are some interesting notes, and you kind of pull them out in the book, of exceptions, notable exceptions. One of those being the Draugr. So whether that is like reanimated corpses, or I guess we should talk about whether that's like the soul in the body, or reanimated corpses, or just necromancy on the part of people who go to the burial mounds. And another notable exception is Balder, who does return. It is kind of, he doesn't return like right away, like Hel keeps him there. But then there is debate, I guess, on whether it is Balder returning after Ragnarok, to be one of the gods that repopulates and rebuilds. So that brings up the idea of reincarnation. And so I guess I have two questions for you, theologically speaking, and to pull at. And the first one is, what the hell do Draugr have to do with anything? Is that necromancy? Does the soul live in the body? Can the soul be dragged up and the body reanimated, or is it more ghostly than that? And the second question, which we can get to later, is the question of reincarnation and heathenry.
I think for Draugr, there's a lot that's going on with Draugr, and that they are a fun topic to get into. Then I get a little bit into it. Actually, I've got an episode about it on my podcast. It's like a little Halloween special, but to get into it a little more, the stories we have about the Draugr talk about them as being like dead who are up and moving around, or are like, say, holding feasts within their grave mounds, or sometimes they're plaguing local communities. Like that bit in the Northmen where Amleth goes into the mound to take the sword out of the mound is something that happens pretty frequently in the sagas, of people having to fight Draugr to take their treasures for some reason or another.
Yes. And it is also important to note that there were burial practices that were intended to stop you from being a Draugr after death as well. Like tying, I think it was one of them was like tying the feet together so you couldn't walk after death.
Or like bringing you in backwards through the door of the grave mound. so you would get lost on your way back out. It's actually kind of interesting that when you look at burial practices all over the world, there is a certain strain of like the way people relate with the dead that could be summed up as we want to make sure they stay in the ground once we put them there.
Yes.
It's one that pops up pretty frequently around the world. So it's kind of interesting that that seems to have been a common like impulse with humanity of like, shit, are they really dead?
Right. And then oh my gosh, we won't even get into this morbid history, but the grave bells for if somebody was buried alive in Victorian era, that like kind of panic about being buried alive that happened there as well.
It explains why gravediggers in gothic fiction are just these weird, creepy people because they'd have to be like taking care of the graveyard and then suddenly, randomly, a bell starts ringing and they have to dig somebody out.
Okay, I'm going to return to this later, but I just had a brilliant novel idea, which is like somebody who is super burned out as a magician and decides, okay, well, I'm just going to have a manual labor job for the rest of my life as a grave digger, but then suddenly becomes the town necromancer and does not want to be.
I could see that. Like, I think theologically, this whole concept of restless dead is something that's pretty interesting. Of that, it like there's a few ways you could look at it. If it could be a sense of that the person's very attached to their lived experience, or in some way have like unresolved relationships or connections with the world back with them. Um, there is also, and this is something that came up in my conversations with Rune Rasmussen around like the whole thing of like the way that things like Alfar and stuff happen, that it's entirely possible that the things that eventually become like a spirit of place might have originally been a dead person at some point or another. Or at least that was one possibility that came up when we were talking about death and the dead and all that. Um, but like more generally, I think what it is that there are also sometimes dead who their death happened in a way that has not been resolved or not been properly addressed, or there's been some kind of injustice. Or, I mean, when we look at the common motif that's in the sagas of somebody took something from the grave mound, so now the Draugr is wreaking havoc on the local area, that is, violation of the space of the dead and violation of their home in a way that's similar to violating the homes of the living. So it makes sense that there is that sense of like, no, these are things that belong to them. We should not be trespassing into these spaces because that is of the dead. That is what goes with the dead and what goes with death and the processes of dying. And also sort of more generally of just having that sense of that other, the sense of reciprocity of Weirgild, of that sense of what of justice doesn't just apply to the living. It also applies to the dead who, go down in a way that is not, proper or properly honored or resolved. So it gets, but I think that, and also like, I don't know of any modern examples of dead bodies getting up and walking around. If someone does, please like film it for me. I want to see that. But
Yeah, please write in. Right into the radio show.
And that's again also something that shows up in folklore all over the place. Like, Dracula didn't come out of nowhere. That built on like centuries of similar European folklore that Draugr are kind of a part of as well. So it's very like it's about some of these uncertainties we have around life and death and the ways that we express and work through them. And again, if you see walking corpses, please, send in a video and then double tap the head.
Right. I think that perhaps a spiritual or metaphoric example of the Draugr is sort of you can think about it as like haunting. The past comes back to haunt you, or past misdeeds continue to wreak havoc upon the community until they are resolved. As well as you best honor the people that came before you. And if you don't, this is what happens. They wreak havoc upon the people of the community, searching for the things that you stole from them
Or,
or what have
don't
you.
don't trespass on the dead. You don't have to like them, but you don't need to go poking around in their space
Yeah.
uninvited.
So let's talk about reincarnation in heathenry. So this is one thing that I find personally very interesting. I have personally believed in reincarnation since I was a child. Um, and it was actually one of the things that made me not really vibe with Christianity as a kid. Like, I didn't have a bad experience with Christianity. It didn't make sense to me because I was like, well, how big is heaven that all the people are up there? Like, don't they get reincarnated? Like, I've heard of near death experiences and like all this stuff. I was kind of a spooky kid. Um, Continued to be a spooky person. Um, but that was something that was kind of a sticking point for me. And I still believe in reincarnation. And at times it feels as though I believe in reincarnation in spite of my heathenry, um, or as though it's a place that I haven't found explored very often within heathen spaces, personally.
I think what's interesting about it is there isn't anything I think in the source material that says definitively one way or the other around reincarnation. Like there's even some hints, like if I'm remembering right, and I could be totally misremembering this, one of the versions of the Helgi's Hundingsbane sagas has like a brief reference to something about how the people who came before us believed in something that sounds like a form of reincarnation. But we, the people who are making the saga, don't anymore.
Mm.
And there's also like the example of Balder. Balder dies, but then comes back. And so I think that there's definitely room and possibility for like forms of reincarnation to exist. Like there doesn't like we know that there's things like Philgia that are inherited through family lines, and Hamingia that passes on, and Hamingia is both like what it is we make of like the luck we have as well as what it is that we pass on to others. So the idea of consciousness transferring could absolutely fit, especially because there isn't exactly like a single like soul, so to speak, within heathenry in the same way that there is in like say Christianity or something. This is the definite essence that is you. Like you are the sum of several different parts that come together. So who's to say that at some point the consciousness doesn't pop up again in another form? And there's also like all kinds of interesting stuff about like, Baldur's a good example, but also like say Odin hanging on the world tree of those who pass through into a place of death or that a similar kind of place that brings about great transformation that they then bring back with them. So who's to say that that isn't possible? And particularly because there is that pattern of Odin hangs on the world tree for 9 days and nights on the edge of death and then comes back with the wisdom of the runes. Balder dies, goes to Helheim for an extended period, then comes back after Ragnarok, taking with him some kind of secret that Odin whispers into his ear. We don't know because Odin uses that to punk a giant in a riddle contest, and doesn't give the answer.
That punk.
Yeah, kind of cheating a little bit. It's not a riddle to be like, do you know this thing that only one being in all of existence knows?
Right. Oh my God. Odin.
He can be a dick.
Sly old man. I think that might
Yeah,
literally be one of his kennings, a sly old man
probably.
somewhere.
But yeah, I think that there's definitely space that could be in there. There is, because again, like, we only know some of how death worked within that, and death itself is the great mystery for those who are living on this side of the world. Like, even with like things like trance journey work and interacting with the dead through things like different forms of save and other similar mystical practices, even that is based on what we do have about heathen cosmology by itself, sort of a not the same as the actual whatever it is that happens after we die. So who's to say? Who's to know?
Yeah. And there's a lot of like, this is again more so the um resurrection and necromantic side of things, but there are quite a lot of instances of people speaking with the dead, and speaking directly with ancestors, which again we try to either recreate or learn as a part of our Seath work today. Which is interesting. I think that it really does come down to that, the different Nordic soul parts, where like one soul part could be in, the thing that makes me uniquely Siri, let's say, um, could be in Helheim forever after I pass. But my Filkia and my Hamingya become a part of, the greater web after passing. So in that case, like, is my Filkia and Hamingya a new reincarnation of somebody who came before in me, or is it fully new for me? I know with Hamingya, there's a very distinct, like, this does pass down. But there are a lot of ways that you can look at those different Nordic soul parts and say, oh, like, do they all stick together after death, or do they kind of part ways?
Yeah. And to look at one thing that sort of helped me get my brain around the whole concept of like the Nordic like parts of the self is the looking at like the similar Egyptian concept of where different things happen to the different parts. And that's also part of why, at least in, historical ancient Egyptian practice, that preserving the body was so incredibly important because you had to preserve the boss so that the other parts of the soul could continue to do their thing. And yeah, and that's like, and more generally, that whole thing of like the dead being something that can be accessible, that's like part of that whole thing of it's just a change of state. It's a different way of existing. It's not you cease to exist. It's you're just now existing in a different way and in a different place under different, conditions.
I just realized we should probably back up and talk about the different soul parts for listeners who have not really explored that aspect of heathenry, or who have not read your book yet.
Sounds good. So the ones that I get into in the book are what you could call sort of like the most top level, because there's a lot more. There's like all kinds of different things that get into like for example, like there isn't just like the word might in terms of prowess, strength, something like that. Like that there's more than one kind of might of there's like the might of your capacity versus like the might granted by like the righteousness of your actions, stuff like that. So it's gets way more complicated than this, but this is starting at the top level. This is talking about sort of the four big parts, which are the hugr, sort of your mind, consciousness, will, sort of. I think consciousness almost works better because there doesn't seem to be a sense of separation between thought and emotion in the same way that we do in modern society. There's the Hammer, which is your form, and I emphasize form instead of body because the understanding is clearly that it's not just the physical thing that makes up your physical existence. It's also how you present in the world, how you construct your physical representation, how you interact with the world, and also it clearly is malleable and can be modified. Like there's the more further out, like I guess you could say extreme examples of shape changing that happen in the lore, but underlying that is that the form is malleable and you can change it to and do whatever you want with it. It is yours, so do with it as you like. With all that implies for everybody. The Haminya is sort of luck with but in the sense of not so much like good chance or fortune or something like that, but more like the sum of your ability to cause change in the world and to influence the circumstances and surroundings around you. It is something that is passed on, which, at first blush sounds like something that could accidentally wind up in the bad parts of how the Jedi work in Star Wars. But when you think about it a bit more better fits with ideas like Orlog of what we have as a product of those who came before us. Like the luck that is passed on to us from our parents isn't so much you get this special supernatural power thing or whatever it is. It's more that because of who your parents were and the lives they lived and the circumstances into which they came into the world and the circumstances into which you come into the world, that influences what you can do. That shapes what you can do and how you can live in the world. This also maps really nicely onto lots of very interesting social justice concepts. Just going to put that out there on the table for any folks that might be wondering about that.
Yes, and we can definitely get into that. Let's put a pin in that for later.
Yeah, that might be good to do as its own episode because
okay.
Orlog and Haminya and Wyrd work really well with concepts of privilege.
Yes, I would love to have you back to talk about that specifically. I know you've got some good stuff on your podcast already on those topics for sure.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And the last one is your Philgia, which is the best modern words for it would be like your subconscious, kind of like your id, kind of like your shadow. Not exactly, but yes and no all at the same time. I mean, we're getting into one of those fuzzy, fun places where you're getting a classically pagan answer of yes, no, maybe. It's ambiguous. Good luck. Embrace the contradictions.
I have always thought of the Philkia as like the follower, which that I got that idea from Diana Paxson's Taking Up the Runes. I remember now, and that has sort of been honed a little bit over the years, where now I see it more as like some kind of guiding spirit that can help you in the unconscious realms. So if I wanted to go on an underworld journey, but I had a lot of stuff to do in my everyday life, I might, if I had a really strong relationship with my Philkia, I might ask them to undertake this journey, or to undertake the journey in dreams so that I could also be there in some way. I know that there are instances of the Philkia being used almost as like I know that there's at least one, I believe it's a saga, or maybe in one of the Eddas, where before a great battle, the kings sent their Philkia to meet in dreams, before the battle. So like, I think that that's interesting, and it's not necessarily like, oh, this is the errand runner aspect of myself.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very important to realize that it is a part of self, that, works in a different way on the spirit realm than we currently do, like in our Hummer.
Because it lives there.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally slide back and forth between is it in the sense of appendage, or is it they in the sense of independent entity? Yeah, Philgia is one of those places where stuff gets slippy.
It does, and I feel like it's almost like you have to navigate your own relationship with your Philkia to feel like you know that. And yeah, I think when the idea of the Philkia was first introduced to me, like it was like, wait a minute, so it's like a Nordic spirit animal? Question mark. Which I do not think is true anymore. Not at all. But
I kind of think it's almost like the daemons from the Golden Compass.
yes, that's perfect because I love the Golden Compass so much. And it's really like, yes, it's an intrinsic part of you that is also outside of you that it's just a really fascinating relationship to delve into. In the book in Spinning Wyrd, you have a really, really good exercise for getting in touch with your Philkia. And other meditative exercises that are really important, I think, for some of this weird work, this soul part work, that people can get into a little bit more.
Yeah. And that's also, I think, part of it is developing that sense of mysticism and developing that practice. And however it is that you see the mysticism works, or however it is that you justify it, is fine. I mean, I personally, I think it is equally valid to say I do these kinds of meditations and practices because they're really good mindfulness and meditative exercises and are good for helping me sort through my mental health and processing the events of my day, as it is to say I am doing this to journey into the underworlds, to speak with the dead and commune with them and develop an understanding of what it is they can share with me or interact with the powers. I think that those are both equally valid explanations for why someone would engage in mystical practice, and one or both can be equally true at the same time.
Yeah, I know for me, before engaging in any kind of underworld or necromantic activities, I like to have had an extended period of time of just doing the really meditative, like getting to know myself, and feeling really solid in terms of the soul part work, before engaging in some of that, because it's like, I don't know, my questions can wait. Let's just put it that way. The questions I have for the dead can wait until I'm in a much better state to receive answers.
Exactly. It's, you got to bring these things together and have them all working together.
Yeah. This is a nice sort of segue into talking about animism, which is a very, very important aspect of heathenry, and the one that keeps me coming back to heathenry, honestly, is the way that contemporary practitioners are really incorporating animistic viewpoints into the practice. I really liked the way that you brought in multiple perspectives and how you interviewed other heathens about what animism means and looks like, for them in the book. So this is also a bit of a teaser for the next season of the Heathen's Journey podcast. We will be talking about we'll continue through our rune journey, but we'll also be talking about animism very specifically. So, how do you see animism working within a heathen context? And what is animism to you?
To me, animism is recognizing that we're in relationship with many things in the world around us, not just like other human things, but also like animals and plants and different features that are in our environment and other things that are part of the world around us. And that being in right relationship with all those things, which is to say, living respectfully and in reciprocity with them instead of taking too much and giving too little, is essential to having a good life, not just in a moral sense, but in a keeping everything functioning and sustainable kind of sense. Like that is a thing that, by the way, is something kind of interesting generally about heathen ethics and morality, is it tends to be grounded in less do this thing because it's good and more do this thing because it's good for people around you, and don't do this thing because it is bad for what's around you and creates bad circumstances. But that aside, like that's something that is, I think, comes through and is also of that sort of like animistic logic of that we have to be in this kind of relationship with the powers that are around us, with the world that is around us, and being conscious of our impacts on the world around us. And that can include things like giving offerings to like the Nissa and the Tomta, the space where you live, taking care of like, say, a local beach, definitely not blowing up oil pipelines.
No, yeah.
I explicitly said that, Mr. FBI. So I
yes,
think we're
Mr.
good.
FBI. Yeah. It's even in some of the spaces that I've been in, like I like to think of it even as like respecting the things around you. So like trying to keep a tidy home when I can. Now, mental illness is real and sometimes the functionality isn't fully there, but the intention is there to keep things nice. There's even like a whole host of like the Icelandic Yule lads are all like, do your chores, or the naughty pot licker is going to come for you. Or, no, his name is Spoon Licker. um, but yeah, I think that animism is absolutely essential for us to come back to spiritually in this world. Like, climate change is happening. Humanity has done definite damage to this planet, and reinvigorating animist practices is really important, and an animist viewpoint is really important to understanding our place within that world, and dare I say, decentering humanity as the most important being on the planet, because we absolutely are not.
Yeah. And even in like the Nordic material, we are not. Like the creation of humanity in the Voluspo is like almost like a throwaway bit of it's like it happens over like 3 verses, which are incredibly important, but that's it. It's like they don't go, you shall be fruitful and multiply, for you shall be the stewards of the earth, or anything like that. It's like, okay, there you go. Off you go. We made you, we gave you brains. Like that should be enough, right? Like we gave you the capacity to think, use it.
Right.
But but yeah, I think that it's like with the animism, we aren't the most important thing that's in the world. Like we do have a unique responsibility because of what the capacity we have to change the world and cause serious change to the world. But that doesn't make us, like how so much of modern society sees ourselves as separate from nature, as separated from the natural world. And that's part of how we're in this mess of going, well, we're not part of this. And it's like, well, we absolutely are. We're doing things that are incredibly destructive to the rest of the natural world because we are so deeply connected to it. Like if we were like as disconnected as like modern society strives to be and claims we are, then we wouldn't be trashing the climate the way we are, because somehow we'd be living in a way that has zero footprint, instead of how everything exists. If it's all bundled up in all these messy and complicated relationships. And absolutely, I agree. Like we have to bring back animistic ideas and animistic consciousness in this world in the face of ecological crisis. Because if we don't start thinking again about our relationships to the world around us, how we impact the world and how the world impacts us, and scaling down how that impacts all the different forms of life around us, it completely changes how you approach these questions of, well, do we do this thing? Do we build this thing? Well, we have to actually take into account what are the consequences of building this thing beyond, well, someone's going to make money and there will be jobs. And it'll make stuff or whatever it is that it's going to do, or it'll be the umpteen millionth boutique craft brew pub that's totally different from every other unique craft brew pub on the block.
Right. Yeah. And I also think that there's another concept within this that is important to pull out. And animism reinvigorates me when I am like at my most climate despairing, when I am deepest in climate grief and feeling as though there's nothing that I can do. Animism helps, like my understanding of animism and reflecting on animism helps me to reconfigure my place in all of this. And I think that especially for people who don't have that perspective, it can just be this really overwhelming, like, oh my God, like, I don't even know how I can have an impact here without this sense of playfulness. And there's also a sense of, not a sense of, there's also the potential for people to say, well, why should I care that, 100 years from now, the planet will be dead? I have not personally, thankfully, I have not personally met a person who thinks that way. Or at least not someone who would blatantly say that out loud. Climate deniers are real, but
I think it's implicit in all the folks that say, well, Jesus is going to save us anyway. Like, I don't think it's said, but it's sort of implied pretty strongly there.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, yes, in the evangelical Christian, particularly, like
they're not saying, why should I care? I'm not going to be here 100 years from now. They're saying, well, Jesus is going to save me. So why do I care about this sinful earth? It's like, well, the rest of us still have to live on it.
Right.
Your children still have to live on it.
Oh my God. Yeah. Don't even, the political and religious and everything ideologies of accelerationism just fucking terrify me. But I'm saying that animism is beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
There is this beautiful thing that does exist.
Yeah. And it celebrates the world around us. It sees it as, no, this is something we can be in relationship with and we can be interacting with. If it's not just like there's that nature that's over there that maybe I occasionally go and visit, it's like, no, this is part of something that we're always in relationship with. That we're as much in relationship with it as when there's some crows or ravens chattering on the power line as it is when you're hiking out in the woods or cleaning up I already used cleaning up a beach, but doing all these different things of interacting with the world around us. It's looking at the world again and seeing the possibility in the relationship instead of just reducing everything to, well, it's just a thing. Well, it's not just a thing.
Exactly. You talk about this concept of reenchantment in the book as well. And that reading about reenchantment was a little bit of a balm to my soul at the time that I was reading it. So why don't you share a little bit about what that means with the listeners?
Sure. So the idea of reenchantment comes from an older idea of disenchantment, which we get from a German sociologist named Max Weber, who was writing a little after Karl Marx. And for anyone who does sociology or any social sciences, you've probably heard of him somewhere. Um, but he, along with like some other authors and stuff around the same time, coined the concept of disenchantment, which was this idea of that the sacred and the mysterious and the wondrous were being driven out of life by like the steady beat of like progress and science and all this other stuff. Of that, because we are moving into this new, more rational and enlightened age of industry and progress, that the light of science is banishing these dark corners. But because of that, it is sort of stripping some of that wonder and mystery from the world as well. Whereas like reenchantment turns around and says, well, that like, and there's like sort of an implication in like the disenchantment material from like Weber and some others that this isn't a completely good thing, but it's sort of is sort of almost treated like a growing pains kind of thing. Whereas reenchantment says, well, no, actually, this was not a good thing because the processes that brought this on were, when you look at the history of like, it's not just nice, neat, linear, oh, things got better because smart men started making cool devices that made our lives easier or something. Like all these processes that made this industrial civilization we're living in are founded on massive scale, like violence and dislocation and cultural eradication and reformatting and all kinds of just massive, not really consensual kind of changes that were inflicted on people and brought this kind of deep trauma that's like not just cultural, it's also like in the weird and in Orlog and in everything. And reenchantment is basically saying, no, we have to unwind these processes. We have to undo the harmful ideas that came out of all of this, and we have to find a new way that reinvests that wonder and mystery in the world. And there's plenty of room for those things in the world. There's many things that we don't understand or don't know. And, you know, for anyone who like keeps up on science news on a regular basis, there's always new stuff that's being discovered. There's always new things about like our biology and like about like animal species and everything that's always being found. So it really is kind of not, and I'm like, there may be some folks that are listening who are thinking, well, this sounds like a little like unscientific, like they might be hearing a little bit of Carl Sagan's demon haunted world or something in the back of their head. But it's not like creating superstition or doubt. It's more just embracing the wonder that exists within the world around us, that this world is incredible. Some of the stuff we've done is actually kind of incredible, and that there is great mystery and possibility that lies beyond the edges of what we know. And it's also, I think, goes back to something that is actually very scientific when you think about it, of accepting the limits of our knowledge and not saying, therefore, that's the furthest we're ever going to go, but more saying, there's things we don't know, there's things we don't understand. And to have the intellectual humility of saying, yes, there is a lot we know, but there's a lot more we don't know. And we should be mindful of how little we know based on what it is we do know. Like that whole thing of the more you know about something, the more you become aware of your ignorance of things that are beyond your understanding. And being in that kind of more of a, like, I guess, culturally mature space of saying, yes, we have come through all these different processes that have wrought these incredible changes and brought this great understanding. But that understanding has only reinforced how incredible everything is around us, and that we have to find ways to fix the damage that's been done, as well as acknowledge the mystery and sort of the limits to what we do know. Because otherwise, we're not going to grow, we're not going to change, we're not going to get better. And we absolutely need to work through why disenchantment happened in the first place.
Yeah. Disenchantment feels like such a moment of intense disconnection, whereas reenchantment is like, I am reconnecting with the world around me. Some examples for me is like when I like wear a shawl that I knit myself, right? I'm like, oh, like I made this slowly with my own hands, or doing different meditations, going into nature is a way for me to re-enchant the world around me, but also like, yeah, just the things that I don't know is really huge and important. Um, Re-enchantment is like, if you it's such a challenge as well to our modern day cynicism. Uh Maintaining hope feels like finding enchantment in a disenchanted world.
And that's what we need to do. We need to find ways to make our own hope and make that wonder and reconnect with what's around us, because it's when we're disconnected. It's when, I mean, we also use the word disenchantment and disenchanted for referring to not just that broader thing, but also for like a feeling of being let down, of being crushed, or being left by the wayside by something. And re-enchantment of recreating, of making a new kind of hope and making a sense of, well, we can do something, we can have agency, like in a world that actively encourages us to be disconnected and disenchanted. It's like, it's a medicine that we all need. It's the most powerful rebellion that anyone can do on a personal level. Like making that space where, at least in this very small space, I am living free, like, is something that nothing can take away from anyone.
Yeah.
That's also why it's so important.
Yeah. That's a really beautiful note to wrap on, I think. Thank you so much for your time. If listeners are curious about you and your work, where can they find you?
So the best places you can find me is, I have a podcast, Wayward Wanderer, which you can find wherever podcasts are put out. So, Apple, Spotify, not your cereal box. Cereal boxes don't have podcasts, I don't think. Maybe they will. That could happen. But and you can also find news, updates, classes, and more stuff at onblackwings.com. And there's also links there to the Fire and Ice Discord and Facebook. So, and also our Mastodon.
Lovely. I don't think I'm in your Mastodon yet. I should explore those links myself.
Mastodon is so much better for your mental health than Twitter.
I'm still in the learning curve of Mastodon. It definitely feels like a behemoth, but I'm going to figure it out, I swear.
Honestly, my favorite thing about it is Mastodon has never randomly gone, what do you think about this random Nazi's opinion about queer people breathing?
Oh my God.
Like, I didn't realize how much I didn't need that until I was on a network that doesn't do that.
Right. And I'm sure you were already pretty done with that, but like then it's like the total absence of it is incredible. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ryan. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, Siri. It's been great being on.
Thank you so much for listening to the Heathen's Journey podcast. I'm so honored to share these practices, conversations, and thoughts with you. If you would like to support this podcast directly, please consider supporting it on Patreon. I share episodes without the ads, and I also share announcements of upcoming work. I have only one tier at $3 a month, but you can give whatever works best for you. If you would like more of my writing on Nordic folk magic, consider subscribing to my newsletter Trollbrev. The name means magic letters, and it is a space for me to share some of my weirder and developing thoughts on magic. Links for both Patreon and the newsletter are in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, keep it weird.